So the Poco F2 Pro was recently launched as essentially a rebadged Redmi K30 Pro. And this made me think that Xiaomi has some really serious problems in regards to like their international lineup and their brand image. I just got to my office, let's talk about it. This is my work environment. Now, before we can talk about and understand the issues with the Poco F2 Pro and the international launch, we need to take a couple moments and talk about the history of Xiaomi and how they found themselves in their current predicament with such a scattered lineup of devices. And we're in the furnace. Whew, toasty. So essentially Xiaomi was started around 2010 as a software company originally, and it was a developer driven port of Android. The first one was based on Android Froyo, I believe, and essentially it was a China-specific skin of Android made to emulate, in a lot of ways, the things that we had available on iOS at the time. That's turned into Xiaomi becoming a huge smartphone manufacturer that now makes specific smartphones for their software. And in a lot of ways, the way that Xiaomi as a brand and their phones started as like a thing is actually kind of similar to the Nexus line of devices. If you think of how Google made the Nexus line of devices specifically for Android as they saw it, Xiaomi is doing a very similar thing, but with their version of MIUI. I never grew up drinking sodas or soft drinks as a kid, and I maybe drink 1 or 2 soft drinks a week at the most. But sometimes, especially after a meal, a soft drink just hits the spot. I don't know why. And the reason why this becomes an issue for Xiaomi is their enthusiast base that helps them create the feature sets that we have in MIUI. Those are also the vocal people online and the people that like to talk about Xiaomi devices, and people like me that like to make videos about Xiaomi devices. And this kind of becomes an issue because for Xiaomi, a lot of their marketing outside of China is done by their enthusiast fan base and people like myself that make content about it. And so when people like myself are informed of all of the other things that Xiaomi is currently doing in the market with their lineup of phones, and we're talking about them, then people in like Europe know that there's a Poco F2 Pro that also has OIS and a telephoto lens. And it's priced in China similarly to how their Poco F2 Pro without OIS is priced in Europe. But like, why is Xiaomi doing this? Why is Xiaomi making a Poco F2 Pro with OIS on 2 lenses and selling it in China? Well, this really comes down to the fact that there are kind of 3 main markets that Xiaomi and, to be honest, most smartphone manufacturers care about. China, which is one of the biggest markets in the world. It's also Xiaomi's domestic market. India, which is one of the most well-informed and tech-savvy markets in the world, but they also have crazy imports and taxes and all kinds of regulations to bring more manufacturing to India. And then there's just the rest of the world. And so in China, Xiaomi doesn't have to segment its brand between Redmi devices and Xiaomi devices and Poco devices. Xiaomi's just kind of a household name there. They make everything from like fitness trackers to rice cookers to toothbrushes, review to my toothbrush up here, to facial cleansers, review to my, it could be a sex toy, but it's also technically a facial cleanser thing up here. And so people look at anything made by Xiaomi as being a relatively good value to dollar comparison. So when Xiaomi releases a Redmi phone, the Chinese consumer base understands kind of innately that Redmi devices are made slightly worse, and there's other kind of refinements that like the Xiaomi version of the device doesn't get. And there's really no reason for Xiaomi to have a Poco brand inside of China, because the Poco brand is just meant to like stand for high performance, low cost. But if you're outside of China and you're looking at buying Xiaomi phones, it would be really, really confusing for Xiaomi to have like a bunch of phones that kind of overlap, and it would be difficult for consumers to potentially understand what the differences are, because for the non-enthusiast crowd kind of pays attention and cares about things like a haptics motor and vibration, or optical image stabilization and being able to take better pictures at night. Whereas like enthusiasts generally just want some of the most performance that they can get for the lowest possible price. Outside of China, if we look at the international lineup of Xiaomi devices, it's really quite clear. Redmi devices are the cheapest and the most bottom of the barrel. The highest equipped Xiaomi device that is offered, the highest spec'd and the highest price Redmi device outside of China is the Redmi Note 9 Pro, or whatever the Redmi Note 9 series of devices would be. So Redmi is like their cheap budget brand. But then what about Poco? Well, Poco is Redmi construction, or cheap construction, not the same, or to be honest with you, not even really necessarily that close to the Xiaomi series of devices in regards to cameras. But it's good specs and it's good performance and good value. That's what Poco is. The Poco F2 Pro gives us the flagship spec camera and then just leaves out everything else with kind of a potato shitty ultra wide camera, an average macro camera, and a depth sensor. But it's got the Snapdragon 865, UFS 3.1, and LPDDR5X RAM. Maybe think of Poco as like the I like to stay in my mother's basement and play PUBG all day line of devices. And then on the other hand, the Xiaomi devices, the lowest spec Xiaomi device outside of China is the Xiaomi Mi Note 10, or now it might be the Mi Note 10 Lite. I don't even think that's going to be launched outside of China. I think it's just the Mi Note 10 or the Mi 10 Lite, and that is going to be higher tier cameras, better build quality, and the lowest tier SoC that's available on that is the Snapdragon 730 series. And there's more of an emphasis placed onto the build quality, the design, and the overall user experience. Because to be honest, if we look at the Poco devices in regards to build quality, they're not that great. Other than the fact that we have a motorized camera, which is kind of a recycled thing from last year, there's not that much about the devices that stick out as being like special or necessarily unique. It's not that they're bad, but they're not that special or unique. This brings us back to the Poco F2 Pro. And why a Poco F2 Pro instead of a K30 Pro being launched? Well, if you're in the international market and you know nothing about Chinese phones or kind of phones in general, and your friend says, oh, if you're on a budget, you should get a Redmi, and you walk into a phone store and you see the Redmi K30 Pro Zoom Edition, which is $600, that doesn't seem like much of a budget phone to you. But if your friend tells you, hey, if you need to buy a phone on a budget, go buy a Redmi phone, and then you walk into a phone store and they have the Redmi 9, the Redmi Note 9, the Redmi Note 9 Pro, the Redmi Note 9 Pro, whatever. Oh, well, all of these devices are under $300. How much money do I want to spend? And I know that this is the value I'm going to get. Likewise, if you say to your friend, hey, I want to play video games on a phone, or I want to do this on a phone, what phone should I get? And your friend goes, you should buy a Poco phone. And then you go into the store, and all of the Poco phones are more than $300, and, or let's say, yeah, like roughly $300, and less than $550, and you see that, oh, well, I can get a Snapdragon 865 or 768, and they've got a good main camera sensor, and it's pretty cheap. That's compelling. Likewise, if you tell your friend, oh, I want to get a nice, like, high-end phone with the best camera specs possible, and your friend says, go get a Xiaomi phone, you walk into the Xiaomi store, and now you can buy the Xiaomi Mi 10 or the Mi 10 Pro or the Mi Note series, and those all have significantly better, higher quality cameras than those other devices. The build quality on all of those is tangibly better, and those devices all have AMOLED displays. Well, that's kind of the point, that if you need to get something on a super budget, you have Redmi. If you want price to performance and you don't want to buy a premium phone in regards to cost and or like construction, you get the Poco. And if you want the best device from Xiaomi at this budget, you buy a Xiaomi device. So really then this comes back to talking about the problem or the issue with the Poco F2 Pro. And the biggest problem with this device isn't the device. It's not Xiaomi. It's actually enthusiasts like me talking about all of these great devices that this company makes, but technically doesn't offer where you live. Or technically where I live. I just live so close to China, I have to pay a minimal upcharge to get a Chinese device, which is part of the reason I live in Vietnam, because if I didn't live in Vietnam, I wouldn't have access to all of these devices so quickly for such a reasonable price, and I essentially couldn't have this YouTube channel. That's going to wrap up this video here. Until next time, it's been Mitchell. Trying to do more of these vloggy type videos because they're kind of more fun than being stuck in the studio.